I'm McKenzie. I'm in the Questrom School of Business studying marketing, and I've chosen to do some research on puppies because they are my absolute favorite thing. So let's start with this. This is what's known as a consumer decision-making journey in the field of marketing research. And you've probably never thought about a decision you've made in this sort of way, but I can almost guarantee you that every company you've ever bought something from has. So let's pretend for a second I'm a yogurt company. You are your average local Target customer. You have decided that you need to buy yogurt today. You're in step one, right? So where you go from there, you might pick up a package of yogurt. Why did you pick up that one, though? You probably have no idea what made you search for the information on that. But I probably do know exactly why you chose that one. Maybe it's the color, the size, etc. So once you pick that up, you're reading it, say, you have moved into the third stage, which is known as evaluation. So at this point, as the company, I can say to you, your yogurt is 75% fat-free, or I can tell you that your yogurt is 25% fat. That is what's known as a framing effect, and it is likely going to have a huge impact on your decision. You would never notice that, but I've paid a lot of money to someone to figure that out and to figure out which one you're more likely to choose. So the way that companies think about it is in any of these stages, you can be influenced by things that marketers can do. So once you make the choice, you can be influenced, and then your satisfaction with that choice is also possible to be influenced after the fact. So what I wanted to do was essentially bring this type of research to animal shelters. These are nonprofits who often don't have the resources, capabilities, time, money to pay for this sort of thing. So what I did was design a couple experiments. The first one is basically tries to figure out preferences between shelters and breeders. So go into that now. So this is the way it was set up. I surveyed 300 people for this first one through an online service known as MTurk. It's supposed to be essentially representative of anyone across the country. So there's no sort of demographic skew, age skew, anything like that. And everyone in this first survey saw this message. Imagine you're in the market to acquire a dog. You see that the dog is available with the following photo and information. I used these 3 different pictures of puppies. Why I used 3 was I wanted to make sure there were no breed differences, so people can have different opinions based on breeds, and I wanted to see if this would impact that. Get more into that later. And then half of the sample saw this message: Brody's a 6-month-old male available from a local shelter. The other 150 saw this message: he's available at a local breeder. So the essential things I wanted to test for was a difference between these 2 groups. I asked a series of questions. The first one were ratings of likelihood for these 4 variables on a 7-point scale. So it would be how likely do you think this dog is to be healthy? How likely do you think he is to have a good temperament? How easy would it be to get the dog? And how likely would there to be information provided on its history? I then asked willingness to pay, which is phrased as what's the highest amount of money you would pay for this dog? So theoretically, people are supposed to give an amount that they would pay, not what they would expect the amount to be. And then, really importantly, I asked purchase intent. So this is a pretty common thing in market research. It basically says, how likely would you be to get this dog if it was available at the price you just stated? And then it's definitely buy, probably buy, not sure, probably not buy, definitely not buy. And those are 5 through 1 in that order. And what that is essentially a measure of preference, and that's going to be the main thing I use to evaluate difference between the shelter and the breeder conditions. So then, of course, I asked some demographic things. I thought maybe people who owned more dogs would be more likely, so I tested for that, where you've gotten a dog in the past. And then also, if you're in the market for a dog. So I chose specifically to also include in the survey the people who aren't currently in the market for a dog. This is because shelters do interact with them. So you might not be looking for a dog right now, but you could see a message from a shelter when you're walking down the street. You could see an ad, that sort of thing. and maybe you'll decide to get one in the future, so your opinion still matters. And then, of course, things like age, income, gender. So what happened was exactly what I didn't think was going to happen. This one here is just the average willingness to pay between the two groups. Kind of predictable. People would expect breeders to charge more and shelters to charge less. But the thing that was really surprising was shelters were actually preferred. So at whatever price you'd previously stated, or the respondent had previously stated, they were more likely to say that they would adopt from a shelter than to purchase from the breeder. So I thought that there would be sort of this bias in the general American public towards breeders. However, this is good news for shelters because according to this, at least, that's not the case. So another statistically significant result was the fact that the rating of temperament significantly increased your purchase intent. So this is essentially just a regression. The rating of temperament, like I said, was on a 1 to 7 scale, and the higher the rating, higher purchase intent. This one here is particularly just for the shelter group and just for those people who were in the market for a dog. But it holds true across the board that temperament increased purchase intent. So where I went from there, for the second survey, I wanted to figure out what exactly it was about the dog's temperament that people cared about. So what is it that shelters could emphasize that would even further increase this? So what I did was test different messages. So this survey went out to 700 new people and had 12 different conditions because, again, they saw the 3 different pictures of dogs. And then they would also see one of these 4 messages. So like I mentioned earlier, the first thing I wanted to test was a framing effect. So essentially, there is one way of wording it, which would be positive. So that's 68% of animals that come into shelters are adopted, and taking this dog home would save his life. The opposite of that, negative, you can think of like a sad sort of Sarah McLachlan type ad. 32% of the animals that come into shelters are euthanized, and taking him home would present him from the same fate. So emphasizing that sort of like death aspect of this as opposed to the life side. And then the other 2 messages I wanted to test against each other were emphasizing the obedience of the dog versus emphasizing how friendly it was. So not only would shelters make a choice between what they can say about the dog, but they can also make the choice of how they want to spend the dog's time when it's in the shelter. So they can train it, take it to obedience classes, or they can have them hang out with other dogs. Wanted to see which one would be more important to potential new owners. So again, what happened here? There's supposed to be a graph, but it's not showing up. So I thought the negative message would be less effective. However, it was actually more effective than the positive message in terms of increasing purchase intent. And then also the friendliness message was more effective than the obedience message. So the positive and obedience didn't actually increase purchase intent at all over the control group, which would be in the first survey when they saw no message. So this is completely unexpected for me because my hypothesis when I first started this project was that those sort of sad guilt trip ads wouldn't work at all. However, they appeared to. So also when you narrow down just into those people who are looking to acquire a dog who are in the market, the messages became less impactful to them, which is also rather interesting. I thought it suggested that people who are actively in the market are maybe more engaged in the messages, taking into account more things, but those people who aren't currently looking for a dog can be more easily influenced by the things that shelters say. So what does it all mean? From the first survey, we saw that essentially, public opinion is better than what a lot of shelters currently think it is. At the onset of this project, I talked to a lot of people who work in shelters, volunteers, that sort of thing, and there's kind of a tendency to be negative in terms of the outlook. It's sort of like people will always go to a breeder, there's not much you can do about it. But this survey actually suggests that that's not the case, and public opinion in terms of the inherent quality of dogs from shelters is good. And then The other most important result is that that euthanasia word can actually be really useful, and also that potential new owners might care more about socialization of the dog than almost anything else. So, of course, there is more work to be done. One important thing to go into, I think, would be sort of field observation-based experiments. So if you could, or some researcher could work with a shelter and get them to actually change their messages physically and see, maybe track interest in a certain dog, that type of thing. Also looking into that pricing question, looking into different breeds. There's a lot of places to go with it, and I am hoping that more academic research happens soon to help out shelters. Thanks.
So for the MTurk sample, do they control for region of the country as well?
Yeah, it's supposed to be, I don't know if I mentioned it, you pay for it through Amazon. It's really widely used in research because it's supposed to be representative of just the entire general American public. So I looked at like the age, income level, things like that. They're all sort of normally distributed and pretty representative, and definitely geographically as well, but just the US.
With your findings, are you just like publishing what you found? Are you continuing your conversations with the people working at the shelters? Like, what are you doing with the information that you've found?
Great question. I've made this flyer. I'm not planning on getting it published. My sort of goal with it was to just help shelters and maybe be able to tell them something that they can improve on, something they can do. So I've made this as sort of like a handout I could give to people who work there, just like basically think about what you're saying. If you're the person that's writing like the online pet finder description of the dog, there's some good things in here to know about. And yeah, basically just trying to continue that conversation and just get them to think about it a little bit more. Yeah.
Do you look at income and how that affects decisions versus breeding versus going to?
Yeah. So the income, age, everything, gender like that, I definitely did expect there to be differences for. Like, one of my hypotheses was people with a higher income would be more likely to adopt from breeders. Nothing like that was the case at all. I also thought maybe younger age people would be more likely to go to shelters, just sort of things that I was inherently assuming would happen. And there were like almost no statistically significant, like observable results there, which is interesting, I would say, and points in a good direction. Yeah. Yeah.
Was there a difference in the temperament ratings between shelters and breeders?
So I also thought there would be that, and also with the health, the same thing there. I thought dogs from shelters would be rated lower on specifically those 4 things. It was health, temperament, ease of acquisition, and then information on history. None of that was the case either. Cool. Thanks.